for joining us again on the Transformers podcast. And today we are we're doing the second episode of the six-part series that we're doing on Liberia's new currency, the power of climate finance and carbon trading. And once again, we are very grateful to have the Honorable Jeanine Cooper, who is the Special Envoy for Climate Action and the CEO of the Carbon Markets Authority. We also have a special guest today, and that is Christian Dunbar, who is the Senior Advisor for Investment Financing and Development to the President at the Ministry of State in the Republic of Liberia as well. So welcome to you both.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Archie. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So I think last time we spoke, we kind of touched upon what carbon credits were, the carbon market, and what that meant for Liberia in terms of explaining that. And I think to do a quick recap for listeners, that carbon market, I think there was quite an interesting analogy, or carbon credit, I should say, was it's like if there's an atmosphere, it's like the bank is a bank account, and that's like for carbon polluters. So every time a factory burns fuel or a plane flies, it adds carbon to that account, right? But our forests and the greenery in the planet actually do the opposite. So they withdraw that carbon from the atmosphere and they store it in trees and soil. So if a country that protects a large forest is effectively cleaning up the pollution created elsewhere. And carbon credits is a way to measure that service. And one carbon credit equals 1 ton of carbon dioxide, so on and so forth. So we looked at how it's a product and how the packaging of it works. And we kind of want to sort of, in this episode, look to how that's actually been deployed in Africa already, and countries such as Gabon will be the sort of like the case study, and also how Liberia can learn from that and actually monetize in this sort of early development phase of the carbon market. Guys, would you say I captured that relatively accurately? It was a bit of a hodgepodge explanation, but I tried to keep it as simple as possible. Right. Okay.
It's fine. It's fine.
All right. Okay. So I didn't make anything up. That's good. Right. So if we were to talk about one of the countries that has sort of looked at the carbon market and done quite a good job with monetizing that is Gabon. So Gabon is based in Central Africa, and it serves as a prime example of how forest protection can actually generate economic value. So Gabon is actually covered in almost 90% of rainforests. And Gabon's forests are not only beautiful and stunning ecosystems, but there's substantial carbon storage systems, and they absorb millions of tons of carbon dioxide annually. And for decades, Gabon prioritized forest protection over agriculture and rapid development. And several presidents actually established a national framework of protected areas, including 13 national parks, and this is in the early 2000s. So that unique position of Gabon in global climate negotiations, it gained attention as the world sort of tried to find different ways to reduce our carbon emissions. The forest absorbs the carbon, making the protection absolutely crucial for mitigating climate change. And that sort of global framework is the idea for the REDD plus or REDD plus, standards. So through this standard, countries that provided deforestation and maintained healthy forests can actually receive payments for the carbon emissions that they avoid. And in 2019, Gabon signed a landmark deal with the Central African Forest Initiative, which was supported by Norway. And this agreement committed up to 150 million in payments over 10 years. And that was contingent on Gabon continually and the genuine emissions reductions from deforestation. Okay, so that is a performance-based climate finance. And there's several different technologies that we use, including satellite monitoring, to have this internet and an international verification system. And Gabon was able to demonstrate significant reductions in emissions compared to historic deforestation levels. 2021, they received their first payment of almost $20 million, $17 million, becoming the first African country to be paid for the verified carbon reductions on a national scale. So this success demonstrates that a developing country, in its in its underdeveloped state in some cases, can actually earn revenue if it treats its trees as a legitimate finance source. So a country like Liberia, which has significant forests, Gabon now can basically be a blueprint for how we develop the country and how we can actually utilize our natural resources and the natural sort of state of Liberia to actually become an economic pillar alongside mining and agriculture and energy within Liberia. So that's sort of a bit of a background. I kind of want to sort of kick this thing off with a question to Honourable Cooper. How do you see sort of what Gabon did and converting the forest conservation into economic sort of opportunity?
Thank you, Archie. I love the comparison that you're making with Gabon and Liberia, because we do have many things, many similarities in our topography, our and natural resource endowment. They're 88% covered in forests. We're about 73% covered in forests. Small population, relatively speaking. Yeah. Where
Yeah, in terms of
and maybe
like,
I could have pointed
yeah.
this out before.
Mm.
The Gabon model was modeled off the Liberian model, because in 2014, Liberia signed with Norway a REDD+ project, the first REDD+ project. And the history of that project, when I became Minister of Agriculture in 2020, that project was coming to its natural end. They were negotiating an extension, a no-cost extension. Same $150 million, same model of conserving the forest and ending logging. It was a landmark deal, and it was supposed to help Liberia to transition to a green economy and end large-scale commercial logging by 2020. So in 2020, two things. First thing, COVID hit, and we started to take stock of where we were with this project. The $150 million was split two ways. $70 million was going for institutional support for the government agencies, capacity building the systems, declaring protected areas. I think we have 5 or 7 of them. Even first monitoring what our forest cover was. And then the 80 million, balanced 80 million, was to be in results-based payments, such as the 17 million that you mentioned that Gabon managed to hit in 2019. Was it 2019 that they got it, or 2022?
Yeah, 2021. Yeah.
Yes. So there were significant similarities. The two programs started, and from the perspective of a Liberian, and this was something that I defended vociferously when I was Minister of Agriculture. From our perspective, the REDD+ did not have the desired impact. It had a negative economic impact on the country. At the end of the REDD+ project, Liberia had received less than 40 million, probably around $37-38 million in payments towards institutional support and readiness. We were plagued by any number of problems, everything from suffering from high staff turnover, the lack of technical expertise to set up the high-tech remote sensing. And what I said in Glasgow at the COP was that the goalposts kept shifting and we kept getting more and more stringent requirements to meet that we were not able to meet with the technical capacities that we had. So it was almost designed to fail. What we did do was almost was decimate our logging industry. And what we did do, which was a positive, was to come up with the first national forest inventory, which then clocked that we had 6.6 million hectares of forest out of our 9.6 million hectares since then. What the forest inventory did not say was that we had a net reforestation rate. And so the inventory, strangely enough, was only measuring deforestation, wasn't measuring reforestation, wasn't, yes. So the Red Plus didn't work very well for us. But a lot of the technical glitches that we had, that we faced, and the problems that we faced were redesigned with Gabon to enable success. So we were more of a guinea pig than they were. Same players, Norway, World Bank, and so forth. But we have to. One of the things that we've learned, the lessons that we've learned as a nation, is we need to shift the focus away from Liberia as a conservation site to Liberia as a sovereign carbon provider.
Right.
All of the work that we did with the Red Plus program provided some baselines, did a lot of good policy work, good capacity building, good awareness creation, led to the Land Rights Act that we have, that was also a landmark. Complicates things, but it's a landmark. But it's shift our thinking, because being a conservation site, when we're not meeting our sustainable development goals,
it's like people need to eat.
That shouldn't be our priority. But if we look at what we do have and how we can package it to then self-finance our sustainable development, that is a better model for us. The Red wasn't designed that way, and it wasn't. It's not that it was malicious. It was a learning process for us.
And I guess that's one of that sort of actually quite leads us nicely into the next question, and this is for Honorable Dunbar, about the financing of this stuff. One of the things that was very interesting that you mentioned was that it measured one direction, the deforestation rate. It didn't measure it back the other direction. And so I guess in terms of then creating these new types of financial instruments and different markets, Christian, one of the things I wanted to sort of ask for you from your perspective in government and helping develop our economic policy and advising the ministry state on that is, from an investment perspective, how do some of these different carbon revenues and how does this market become part of a national economic planning? Because if we think of a country like Liberia, where we make the majority of our money comes from mining and, let's say, and agriculture, how do we change the focus of then creating this as a legitimate, economic pillar for the country?
Thank you, Archie, for the question, and thank you for having me. And it's always a pleasure to be with the minister on a podcast. I mean, I think my background is traditionally finance, and I think the challenge in the industry has always been, how do you bring the climate conversation into the finance conversation in a seamless way and in a traditional way. And I think what has happened and what you've seen, particularly so much of climate now has centered around resiliency and is moving towards sort of an infrastructure necessary to withstand some of this change that we're seeing in climate. And so I think that's where the Carbon Market Authority is really positioning itself to be first and foremost a financial entity that can leverage this carbon wealth and leverage the carbon revenue into traditional finance mechanisms to make it more palatable for the finance industry to understand it and some of the mechanisms and how they work. And so the entity as a whole, we're designing it, with the minister to be a sub-sovereign credit rated entity as we work on a country having a sovereign credit rating. And that will help us securitize the revenue that we're seeing from the carbon space into a trusted entity that investors can co-invest with, can collaborate with, and really take off from a finance perspective. Whether it's green bonds, whether it's leveraging carbon revenue in traditional finance ways. I think one of the things that will be really important in this conversation, particularly when it comes to carbon credits in our forest or trees, is combining carbon credits with commodities. We are a tree crop rich nation. So take a crop like rubber or cocoa, being able to leverage the carbon credits on the front end, because what's been so difficult in our marketplace just as a country is how do we find the financing? We have very shallow capital markets. We have not historically added a tremendous of value to our agricultural stock and our commodities. And so how do we now leverage carbon credits, particularly in the early stages? And with tree crops, it takes 5-7 years for them to start producing revenue. How do we leverage the carbon in the early stage of that? And I think it does really two important things, not just in the carbon space, but in the agriculture space as well. First and foremost, in the carbon space, I think it supports the valuation for our carbon credit. And then also on the back end, particularly if you have a structure in the SPV, it is backstopped by a commodity. And particularly if you think about cocoa or rubber, these are commodities that we know and we are used to, right? So not only are we capturing carbon, from the atmosphere, but now after 7 years, we have this rubber commodity that now supports not just our local farmers, not just our economy, but also gives our carbon investors again a backstop to really be able to trust not just the carbon credits. And even if we see fluctuation in the market for carbon credits, now you also have this backstop of a commodity. So I think it's really critically important, this conversation about what is next in terms of our carbon wealth and combining it with our commodities that we've known for a number of years, but have struggled to add value to. So I think that's what we'll see from the Carbon Market Authority. And then when we really create this revenue, a revenue fund or specialized fund, those revenues then, generally speaking, can be collateralized to do, again, green bonds, a sustainably linked financing, and working with some of our partners to add a guarantee on it. Now we can really put high quality paper into the marketplace, not just locally, but globally as well. So I think that's what's really exciting about what is happening with the Carbon Market Authority. And I think within the next coming months, we'll start to see these unique and interesting traditional financing mechanisms, but in a carbon and climate space.
No, thank you. That was.
I think I want to pop in here. I want to pop in here and say that we're sort of pioneering a new direction for climate finance, and that direction is coming from a heavily endowed country with natural capital that's not a polluter, but actually storing billions of tons of carbon and removing millions of tons, hundreds of millions of tons of carbon every year because of our forests. So leveraging our natural capital and our tree crops, etc. This is almost like at the frontier of modern climate finance, and
Yeah.
taking new looks at things like I mentioned earlier, going from just simple conservation, oh, you saved a tree and it will capture carbon and we will pay you, to
Hmm.
looking at the full spectrum of natural capital that we have. How can we stack that? How can
Yeah.
we stack one aspect of financing on top of another? How can we
Hmm.
encourage it? And we like to plant trees.
Mm.
Like Christian said, we know how to plant trees. We know how to add to tree stock.
Hmm.
That's in our national DNA. How can we leverage that?
Yeah.
And that's some of what we're trying to unlock here.
Yeah. There's actually two quite interesting things that that I picked up on that you said. One of them was, like again, from what you're describing, we're getting not just that we are at the frontier, but these are quite sophisticated instruments that we're looking now to start packaging. Whereas, like you say, back in the day when these things started, like a decade ago, or how the different sort of mechanisms originally started, was just conserve this tree, and there's a bit of some guinea pigs happening in terms of how these countries, or let's just say, compensated for their carbon stock. Christian, your background is actually, like, say, in traditional finance. So I kind of want to ask you from let's say, development bank perspective, what roles do you think the DFIs can play? In the how much, the value of, say, these credits, and then scaling that, you know, creating new different types of product, instruments and financial products for these countries, to then we'll sort of pivot. There's a second part of that question, which I'd like Honorable Cooper to answer, is then how do we protect that within sort of our actual, and to develop the countries in a way that is sustainable as well? Because it's all well and good having this money coming in, but then if we're using that to industrialize and create stuff, like how do we sort of balance that out?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's sustainability, right? But
Mm,
sustainability squared, let's call it, right?
mm,
Sustainability not just in the preservation of climate, but sustainability in terms of from a pure finance perspective, that we're going to see this type of financing mechanisms last in perpetuity in a lot of ways.
mm,
And I think when we talk about the value of carbon credits, I think the role that DFIs can play is really in guarantees on some of these instruments, right?
mm,
So as we think about issuing carbon climate, and we know price is going to be driven by investor and demand, what's happening in the marketplace, and the trust with your carbon. And so these guarantees will help improve credit quality, right, for the entities that are issuing them. But then on top of that, because it's backed by these commodities, I think we'll likely see strong investor demand. And investor demand is what really drives, outside of credit quality, strong investor demand is what really drives up the price for countries like Liberia. So I think that's
mm,
what we're going to start to see again. And this is just traditional finance, right? So in traditional investment banking, your bond prices, yes, start with your credit quality, but then they're really driven by demand. And so we see this historically. One of the negatives that we see in the marketplace, with sometimes critical of the rating agencies, right? And there's some level of criticism that they should take, but they take more criticism than they should, because when you control for credit quality, we're still in Africa paying a higher cost for our bonds. Well, that's not the rating agencies, right? If they're saying this rated transaction is the same as one in Europe or Latin
mm,
America, well, then it's the investors that are viewing those other issuances better, and the demand is higher. So now we're getting, they're getting better cost or better price in Europe. So
mhm,
this is the same model we need to think about here in Africa. How do we then drive investor demand, right? So it does. It is hinged on the type of entity we structure with a credit rating, to the extent that we can get a guarantee. But guarantees, when you get a guarantee, whether it's AA or any type of guarantee, depending on what it's rated, that comes with a
mhm,
certain level of transparency. That's really what those guarantees are about, outside of outside of the quantitative numbers in terms of return on investment. But so I think that's where we will see the DFIs hopefully play an important role, is really just stepping in and expanding guarantee capacity, because now that allows us to go out to the market. And that gives us a much larger envelope of money to attract into a country like Liberia than sort of traditional DFIs bringing financing in, because DFIs are limited. But guarantees does not cost them, capital.
Yeah.
We use that guarantee, we structure an investment, and then we go out into the marketplace. And hopefully DFIs play that role, and increase in that role. I think then we see a much, much larger envelope for countries like ours. Because again, when I talk about sustainability squared, you're talking about saving the planet, or environmental sustainability, mixed with particularly developing countries or frontier markets like ours. How do we ensure that the average Liberian is going to benefit from this, whether it's from building resilient infrastructure to not only withstand the cost of climate, but now adding value within a space. Thinking about, when we think about a port, how do we build a green port? When you think about how we build our roads, when we think of preserve, our wetlands, and all these negative cost drivers that affect our population. How do we then turn those around into positives that also helps grow our economy, from a developing nation and moving us closer to a middle income and higher country. So I'm hopeful that's where the DFIs play an important role for us.
Amazing. Thank you.
I think to add to what Christian said, we don't want to approach them asking them for a loan. What we're trying to do with the credit guarantee is saying, stand behind us, help us to put this system in place so that the rest of the world feels safe lending to us. Help us to use the measurement tools, and this goes to your question that you asked, Archie, which is a decade ago, we were counting trees individually, human beings going out counting. We have technology now that you can sit behind your desk and deploy that technology, and it will come out with a much more accurate, much more verifiable, all over the world, instantly. Verifiable system that can give the comfort that this green collateral that we say we have is actually there. And let that be the basis of let that be the credit guarantee. Let be the basis for a credit guarantee. Because we're keeping this, it's similar to the debt for data swap, but a little bit different. We're keeping this. You can see it. You can track that your money is not being misspent, and it's actually opening us up to green ports. It's just there's green everything. The green, industrial corridors that we're dreaming of, green railways, where there's even a company that I spoke to recently that is recycling plastics and making composite railroad ties. I mean, so many ways you can employ the circular economy. 10 years ago, that wasn't always possible. And that's what makes the CMA's time now. We've learned our lessons from the Red Plus. We've learned our lessons from the ways that climate finance has evolved around the world. We've seen the greenwashing and all of the other things that have, harmed the market. And we can put something in place that is robust, that is verifiable, that is transparent, and that can drive our own development financing. So
and that actually comes full circle.
If I can add to that, and so what the minister's talking about, and particularly when we're talking about infrastructure, yes, some of these will be labeled green, but it really is just infrastructure at the end of the day. And so now you'll start to see, non-specialized or restricted financing coming into the space, where now you just have a simple infrastructure manager or infrastructure fund that's looking to acquire this because now it works. Yes, it has a green component and is environmentally sound, but now you have traditional capital coming into the space to support some of these things. And I think that's really the goal, and that's what the Carbon Market Authority is looking to really do, not just the restricted and specialized financing, but also traditional financing coming to the space. And while we're developing as a frontier market, we are, we're protecting our climate and using traditional finance mechanisms to help us do that.
Yeah, and I think that's a great.
Also, the narrative from shifting the narrative from asking for help or asking, please give us a loan, to showing ourselves as an investment opportunity. Yeah,
100%.
Revenue financing versus raising your debt to GDP, and leveraging your country's balance sheet. Now we're leveraging revenue specifically, and that's much more sustainable type of debt and financing, than just simply raising your debt to GDP.
I think, and then for both of you, I think we've kind of come full circle to that initial analogy that I made, is that if we're thinking about it like a bank, like we've got actually real, measurable stock, and we should almost think about it like money. Okay, you want to come and get somebody? Okay, we're going to sell you this, and in the normal finance sort of way of looking at it. I'm going to pause for a second. There is one question I would like to ask you. So we're going to hear something from our sponsors, and then we'll come back. So give us a few. We'll be back in a few minutes. Maybe I'll ask you the same question, just where we're at right now, and what we can kind of expect to see over the remaining months of the year and into next year as well.
Yeah. Okay. So Christian was just saying that we're still in the design and development phase of setting up the registry, setting up the MRV system. We're looking at a number of different models and technologies that are available. And you know what? I can't stress this enough. 5 years ago, when I first started working and thinking things through about how Liberia could enter the climate finance space, most of the technologies available today were not even, maybe they were being dreamed of somewhere, but we weren't even exposed to them. There's so much that we can do today that we couldn't do back then. And so the possibilities are there. Structuring this entity, because there's not very many carbon market authorities structured as special purpose vehicles, for example, for a country. There are not many in Africa. There are similar ones. And Carbon Markets Authority may be a little bit of a misnomer. We could call it something else, but for now, that's what it is. So we're still designing. First thing we need is to measure the asset. That is to do the actual mapping
of all the resources,
technologies that are available today that weren't before: drone technology, satellite technology, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence. Putting it all together so that we have something that is solid. That's the first step. The second step is designing, and really it has to be designed, because when it has to be bespoke. There are generic white products on the market. UNDP has one, World Bank has one, different private entities have these ones, but we have to make it bespoke. We have to design something that will fit our peculiarities, let's say.
Yeah, the uniqueness of Liberia in terms of what it has.
Right, and where we want it to go. So because we wanted to use it to back a sovereign wealth fund, because we want to use it to back green bonds, because we want to use it to finance infrastructure and other sustainable development
goals, yeah.
work. We have to make sure that it's measuring the right things at the right time and showcasing the right things to be able to do all of those things. So it's not just a matter of measuring the trees, saying is this much carbon, we want to sell it. We're also trying to do, and we have a very short timeline, partly because of our own hunger to enter this market, but also because we want to put this thing in place as quickly as possible, and let's start to see the benefits. We've waited long enough. We want to set up the first national environmental market exchange in West Africa. There's a subnational one. Lagos State has just set one up in Nigeria. We want to set one up for the ECOWAS region, or even for the Bono River Union, for ECOWAS region, to be the first one, so they can also trade their carbon endowment through our market exchange. So we have big dreams.
That is incredible.
And
I love that.
What we have that's not always there. We have the president's backing, and he also has this hunger to think Liberia, love Liberia, and build Liberia. So that's what we're aiming for.
Yeah. It was exciting times. I remember, like, say, when we first started this, I mean, and I can even say, excuse my ignorance in some ways, that I think historically we just saw it from one perspective as, okay, these are polluters just kind of trying to greenwash stuff. But now we're actually learning that this thing is a true product, and we're treating it as such. We're packaging it out. I mean, this has gone into so much more detail than I think the previous one in terms of like some of the different tools and instruments that we have to use. But then also the thinking, the long-term thinking behind this, the fact that the CMA and the president, especially in terms of his support for this, are really trying to take this thing forward in terms of as a legitimate source and as a pillar of our national economy in Liberia, in the same way that the Ministry of Mines and mining has that, and the Ministry of Agriculture are actually looking at this as a legitimate, because essentially, like you said, you can grow more trees. You can essentially increase your stock of carbon credits, right? Yeah, so
that's right.
Think about it in that same way, as essentially a way of printing capital due to the uniqueness of the country. There is one, I think, last bit before we sort of call it a night, is what would you say to the international community and markets about who are looking at Liberia, who want to come and partner with that? Because, I mean, we're seeing so many different innovative things that you're coming up with. So what would you say to them about the state of Liberia's climate finance and carbon market?
Well, I would say that because we're unique, and many people may say that, but in Liberia we're truly unique by packaging our forest endowment, our blue economy, our biodiversity stock. By packaging in the right way, we want to move Liberia from being a conservation site, a less developed country, to being a sovereign provider, not only of carbon and carbon credits, but an investment in nature that can then help the world while it's helping us, and we can develop from there. We can do this right. We can build the infrastructure green. today.
Mhm.
And it's not just finance infrastructure. You build it green and it's giving back on the
Yeah.
carbon side. So we can create the kind of circularity
Mhm.
that you see it in a project here and there, but we can do this at national level. We can do this to scale, and we can be a model, a replicable model for the rest of Africa and the rest of the world, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of if we, one of the big things that we often see in the maps is like, the desertification down of, you know, like how the desert's creeping down and actually starting to erode in parts of, Africa's
Mm-hmm.
greenery and everything else. So actually
Mm-hmm.
designing sort of sections of our economy and our communities, the way we're building, if we're starting from a green perspective and a sustainable perspective, it means then that we don't have to rip up, old, your traditional, carbon intensive frameworks and infrastructure to to basically make it green afterwards, after the fact. So Liberia actually holds quite a unique advantage in that sense, don't they?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So when the Sustainable Development Goals were designed based
Mhm.
off of the Millennium Development Goals, we often talked about building back better, particularly for a country like Liberia that was emerging from conflict and civil unrest
Mhm.
and really had a shut economy that was now trying to regrow. So we kept on saying build back better.
Mm.
But with this now, we have
Mhm.
the opportunity to build better from scratch.
Yeah, it's
So
amazing.
we want to industrialize, we want to add value to our
Mhm.
commodities, we want to to sustainably develop, and we have the opportunity to build in all of the frameworks and guardrails that we
Mhm.
need
Mhm.
for a real green or blue economy that is,
Mhm.
if we're going to do a transition, we can do this transition
From the start.
in an
Mm.
impeccable way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, innovators, people who want to see a greener, better, more sustainable world, Liberia is open for business. Come and work with us, as you've heard from the Honorable Cooper. There is a very unique set of circumstances that we're facing right now within Liberia, where they are taking the development of the carbon market and the monetization, let's just say, about carbon stock very, very seriously in a way that hasn't really been seen before at the scale that we're looking at as well. So we do invite
Yeah.
the investors and the international community across infrastructure, across energy, to Liberia, meet with our leaders because they're definitely open to doing some really innovative things and projects. But I think we'll call it there for now. It's a very exciting time, but I'm also very very aware that it's your Friday night. So thank you again, Honorable Jeanine. We really appreciate you taking the time out for us, and I look forward to the next installment of this.
Thank you, Archie. This is fun stuff. This is really,
Yeah,
really exciting. Thank you so much for
thank you.
having me. Thank you for this series.
Mhm.
I look forward to the next ones.
Thank you. All right, take care.